Hey everybody, thanks for joining us here on 9 News Watch. It is the first Tuesday of November, which means it is Election Day. And yes, it is an odd number of years, so we're not talking about the congressional races or maybe not as high-profile races as we might normally be talking about, but nonetheless some significant issues to talk about. And joining us, our 9 News political reporter, Marshall Zelinger, with us here, and he'll be with us all night long, getting into the weeds on a lot of these issues. Marshall kind of wants to start things out with a bit of an overview. What are the big races that you're watching for here tonight?
So no matter where you are in the state, you will have had 3 ballot issues that everyone has on their ballot, which is Amendment 78. There's so many, I always lose track. Amendment 78, Proposition 119, and Proposition 120. So again, these were statewide ballot issues, so results will come statewide on these versus the more local issues, your Denver ballot issues, your city council races, your school board races. Those are based on your city and county, but these other 3 are based statewide results that will impact no matter where you are.
Okay, so those are the big ones to watch for, and we're going to get more into those here in the next few minutes. Now, we've got a few hours left until polls close. Where do you vote, and what time do you have to vote by, and any sort of details about, again, any voting logistics over the next few hours?
7 o'clock. You have to vote by 7 o'clock. If you're in line in person, if you're going to vote in person and you're in line, you will be able to vote even if you have not cast your vote by 7 o'clock. But if you show up to wait in line after 7 o'clock, you can and will be turned away. The same with a drop box. If you're going to turn your ballot in a drop box, and I know we've got an interactive map on our website that allows you to find a drop box near you or even an in-person voting center near you. But you have to, and there's the map right there, you have to have the ballot in the drop box by 7 o'clock. If you are walking up toward the drop box, they can and will turn you away. If you're in line, because there is a line at the drop box as people are dropping them off, I believe the discretion is to let you vote because essentially you are in line waiting to vote. But if you are down the sidewalk, running toward the ballot box, and you have not dropped off your ballot by 7 p.m., they will lock it. They, being the election judges, will lock it, and they are rightfully so to do so because you have had 22 days to vote. And this interactive map that we have on our site that you're looking at a sample right now, the boxes, and
that's Denver, by the way.
Yeah. So these are just, and by the way, I know some clerks don't like us to say this, but you can drop it off in any drop box, even if it's not your county, because there is a reconciliation after the election. So I'm interjecting a lot here. If, let's say you live in Denver and you put it in an Arapahoe County drop box, tomorrow or the next day, it will be reconciled where counties swap ballots to make sure they get to where they were supposed to live. That's why official election results don't happen for 8 or 9 days after the election. There's many reasons for that. One of them is making sure the ballots got to where they were supposed to get. Another is if you forgot to sign your ballot, or if you forgot to sign your envelope, or if there is a discrepancy with your signature, you have 8 days after the election to solve the issue. You will get a letter in the mail, maybe you'll get a text, and then you can sign, and some counties do it digitally, that says, yes, that was my ballot, that was my signature, I attest that I really did turn this in. And that's why official results are not for a few days after at least 8 days after the election. Plus, if it's a close race and it's dozens or 100 or so votes in either direction, candidates can go to your door. They can get a list of people whose signatures didn't match and say, hey, you turned in your ballot, your vote wasn't counted because there was an issue with your signature. If you sign this and you really did vote, sign this saying you did vote, that was your signature. And then results can start to add up and possibly sway one way or the other in a close race. But that website shows where you can drop off your ballot, or if you still want to vote in person, the VSPCs, where you can do the old school touch screen, or I think you can still fill out your mail-in written ballot at a kiosk area there, or you can do it digitally.
This reminds me of something you've been saying for, I think you tweeted this morning, was saying that today is not Election Day. Election Day is, 22 days old? You just alluded to that a second ago. So you've had a lot of time to vote, but you still got a couple hours here until about 7 o'clock tonight. And then you've got, again, you mentioned all the rules. By the way, anecdotally quite interested by the fact that you can vote in different precincts, especially Denver. If you live, for example, right on Sheridan Boulevard, you could go right over to Edgewater or to Wheat Ridge or to Lakewood and vote there. But with that in mind, as a relatively casual observer of Colorado politics over the last few years, something that always strikes me is that about 7:15, it feels like each year you get this big dump of votes, and you have a pretty good idea by about 7:30 or so how things may be leaning. A, will that be the case this year? And B, when do you roughly expect that we'll have an idea about how some of these measures may be leaning?
I know ballot results will be known at 7:01, and in most counties that are ballots that have been turned in through Monday night. So ballots received, even when they're dropped in a drop box, get collected by the county clerks. They go through the election office. Your envelope is scanned to show that you have voted. Your ballot is taken out and then put in a pile. And from then on, no one knows what ballot came from what envelope. So that's how secrecy works. Your ballot, your envelope is scanned that says, yes, you voted. Envelope goes over here, ballot goes over here. Suddenly, nobody knows whose ballot was whose. And that's the privacy issue. So then the ballots get scanned to figure out the results. Ballots that are received through Monday night have already been scanned. And those results are just waiting. Somebody's going to hit, like, add up or whatever the button is. Nobody knows the results until you hit this button at 7 o'clock, and then we will know the results through Monday night. So at 7 o'clock, we will get a dump of results that do not include people who turned in their ballot today or people who voted in person today. So we'll know 21 days worth of people turning in their ballots, which as of this morning was like 900,000 people statewide. So I don't think it was quite 20%, and now we're at about 24.7%. This is the current estimate as of noon that the Secretary of State's office has provided. 961,000 people have voted out of 3.88 million active voters, which turns out to 24.7%. That's not good. In an odd year, that's really low. And just in general, like we had, I should have had the number, it's 75 or 80+% active voter participation in last year's presidential election, and presidential elections are always the highest turnout, but this is a significant drop. And what you're looking at on the left side of the screen here are by age and by party. So on the far left, the group that has voted the most are people 65 to 74. And I'm going to pull this up closer so I can see. The far left on that 65 to 74 indicates I believe that's Democrat voters on the far left. The middle are Republican, and the right no, I have this backwards. The purple are unaffiliated, of course. The red are Republican, and the blue are Democrats. And then you can see there's a little bit of yellow for Libertarian. But on the far left, the most people who have voted are 65 to 74-year-olds, and then next to that, 55 to 64, 75 and older. The theme is, if you are a youngin', you cannot complain about the results of this election because you have not participated. So if you, this is just, I'm going to opine for a minute. If you want to complain about the results, vote. And if you didn't win, complain that your side didn't win. But if you're going to complain and you didn't vote, take your complaint somewhere else because you didn't bother to cast your ballots. End of commentary.
Get off my lawn, says Marshall. But here, I would say, by the way, to your point, last year, Colorado had the second highest turnout of any state behind Minnesota with 76.4% turnout, 86.5% amongst active voters. That's a stunning number. That last year, more than 3 out of 4 eligible voters voted, and then amongst the registered voters, you're talking about 5 and 6. So that's a huge number, but this year, we're just not seeing that. Any inkling or reasons as to why? And do you think it'll pick up over the next years?
Odd year elections are always low. Just they don't have the same people. Like you've either got a Senate candidate or Congress or a president or a governor or people that create more buzz. In the odd year, I would argue this might be more impactful because you've got the local city council races, you've got local school board, you've got sales tax, property tax questions, things that really impact how much you're going to pay because of where you live and the services you get based on where you live. Do you want your city or county to have enough money to plow your road? That's a question that might be on your ballot. Or dictating how much can go in certain places. Like it's at the local level, the odd year is important, and the drop-off is, it's both because it's not as quote-unquote sexy, and secondly, it's confusing. Like, I do this for a living, and it takes me hours of research to read through these ballot issues and to know exactly what we're voting on, and some of it's by design. The ballot language is confusing in some parts because of Tabor, and odd year elections are Tabor years, Taxpayer Bill of Rights, passed in the early 90s. Part of it, or the big chunk that people remember, is that you have to vote on any tax increase. So the people get to vote on any tax increase instead of lawmakers just doing it for you. But it also came with a caveat of how ballot language exists. So the shall taxes be raised by X dollars amount, and like that's on purpose. It has to be worded that way. I would say it's confusing. It could be written in a simpler way, but it's in the state constitution that this is how a money issue must be written on a ballot. So that's another reason I think there's low turnout, because once you open your ballot and realize you were not prepared perhaps for this, if you're confused by something, you're either going to vote no or you're just going to not vote at all and move on to something more fun.
I can tell you anecdotally, last night my girlfriend at the dinner table spent over an hour filling out her ballot, and there are a few unfamily-friendly terms used in the middle of that. So to that point, it's interesting with the Tabor background. It's in the state constitution, so you need, I believe, 2/3 override to get rid of Tabor. Long story short, it's basically entrenched in the state constitution, has been for almost 30 years. That in mind, anything else that our viewers should particularly keep an eye on tonight? Is it something out of state? Is it something within state? What hopefully by tomorrow morning we have a good idea about those results. Will you be looking for most?
Colorado is well known for leaning liberal for its candidates and conservative for its ballot issues. So from a city council, school board standpoint, I'd be interested to see which candidates win versus the money issue. So the Amendment 78, Proposition 119, Proposition 120. Like Proposition 120, for instance, would put more money in some people's pockets and perhaps take money from cities and counties. That's a conservative issue. And so history shows that maybe voters lean toward that conservative issue. Proposition 120, a yes vote, this is a little confusing. It would lower the property tax assessment rate, which is part of the equation that determines what your property tax is. But because of something that state lawmakers did earlier this year, they changed the part of the law that this proposition impacts. And so the people who put this on the ballot intended to lower property tax assessment rates for anyone who owns property, anyone. But lawmakers changed the definitions of property, essentially. And so now a yes vote only will impact multifamily properties, not single-family homes, not condominiums. It will impact lodging properties, so apartments, apartments or multifamily, hotels, motels, and B&Bs, but it will not impact other commercial property. If you vote no, there is going to be no change, nothing to see here. If it passes, the people who put this on the ballot intend to go to court to sue to make sure that it impacts all property owners like they intended. The issue is propositions change state statute, and lawmakers can also change state statute. So even if this were to pass, and let's say lawmakers did nothing ahead of time, if this were to pass, there's nothing stopping lawmakers from changing state statute at any time. So this could have passed, impacted all property owners. It wouldn't have been a popular thing, but lawmakers could have then next year been like, well, let's change the definition of properties now that we know that this has passed. So long story short, propositions can be changed by state lawmakers after the fact. This issue is, it was kind of changed before the fact. And so if it passes, again, the people who put Proposition 120 will go to court to say, hey, if you own a single-family home, we intended for this to lower your property tax, and it should. Right now, if it passes, it won't until it goes to court, and perhaps we'll find out if a judge says, yeah, they intended it to impact everybody, and it's going to impact everybody. If you're confused, I'm sorry. I try as best as I can to summarize and dumb it down, but just know if you're voting yes, you're voting for part of the equation for the property tax assessment to go down, which would likely lower your property tax rate. And just know there's a caveat that at the moment, it won't impact all property owners, but it perhaps could.
I got one final kind of potentially a little bit prying question here. Is there one ballot or one issue to watch for that may be a bit more partisan than the others that may gauge a sentiment about where the mood of Colorado may be right now?
I wasn't expecting. Amendment 78 off the top of my head would show that, because Amendment 78 would dictate that the state legislature dictates where all the money in Colorado goes. A yes vote would say Any money that comes into the state must go through the state legislature. Right now, the state legislature handles the budget, which is essentially money from property taxes and sales tax and like the money that you just expect a state to get from everyday living. And then they allocate it for education, healthcare, human services, prisons, things like that. But this deals with, hey, let's say Congress gives more COVID money to the state, or there's a legal settlement over another tobacco issue. That money is not funneled through the state legislature. So in those two examples, the governor last year allocated how COVID money was going to be spent without going through the state legislature. I'm sure there was some behind the scenes talking with some leaders of the state legislature, but he did it through an executive order. And then the Attorney General handles legal settlements. So there's a tobacco settlement or a drug company settlement that the Attorney General decides where and how that money goes. So if you vote yes, you're saying no, we want state lawmakers to decide where and how that money goes. If you vote no, you're saying no, we like the system that's in place, the legislature doesn't need to get involved in that. So your question was, would it show any kind of leaning one way or the other? I think if people vote yes on this, they're saying they agree with the state Republicans, essentially, that had issues with this last year, especially with the COVID money, that state Republicans at the legislature had no say in where and how this money was spent because the governor just did it. And so if you vote yes on this, you're saying, you might say, yeah, I agree with the conservatives at the Capitol that maybe we should have more oversight, even if it's going to create more hoops.
Interesting. By the way, because this is an amendment and changes the language of the state constitution, this requires 55% to pass, so keep that in mind as well.
And that's a more difficult hurdle, and that was passed by lawmakers, or that was passed by voters, 4, 5, 6 years ago, that said instead of 50% plus one, since the Constitution is very simple, it was simple to change in Colorado, now it's a little more difficult with 55%. That is a high bar to reach, so that one's a little more difficult than the propositions, which only require 50% plus one to pass.
So there you have it. So it should be an interesting night. You'll be with us here on 9 News Watch, Marshall, and on 9 News YouTube, tracking this for us through the remainder of the evening. Marshall, we appreciate a few minutes of your time, this great primer. And again, if you're confused, it makes me slightly reassured to know that you are a little bit as well. But again, we'll be with you throughout the remainder of your night. Have a great few hours and get out and vote.